Hello and welcome back to the Prison Pod. This is season 4, episode 5, and we have a great guest joining us today. Velda Dobson-Davis will be joining us. I found out about her through Pathway to Kinship, and right off, I had to have her on my show because I love having beautiful women doing powerful work.
Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome you, Velda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
I really appreciate you taking time out, especially on a holiday. I'm going to start right off and ask you a little bit of how you started working in corrections.
I actually started working in corrections in Florida in a county jail as a matron. And so I came in through these programs that are soon to be ended, what was called CETA at that time. It was a opportunity to bring in individuals of color and women to corrections, a male-dominated field. And I happened to be a dispatcher at a police department, and they were looking for individuals to go work into the jail. And so I started as a matron I was about 19 in 1974. So I'm 69 now, just to show you the tenure.
So were there very many women doing that type of work back then?
There were not a lot of women in corrections. In fact, in Florida, 1970 was the year that women have always been around doing not certified correction officer jobs. So you weren't deemed a correction officer, you were a matron. Women that work with women were called a matron back then, right? So I was hired as a matron in the jail. But women became certified, I think the first one was certified in 1970, but I wasn't deemed an officer. I was a matron. But there's also the Department of Corrections. So you have the city jail. I worked in the city county jail. I didn't work in the state of Florida's corrections. So there weren't very many in my jail, but you have tunnel vision when you're 19. I didn't look around. I didn't look at it at that time. I could not see where I am today. I couldn't see longevity in that field. I didn't see the possibility for growth. I saw it as a stepping stone to a job. I wanted to be a police officer, really, but I couldn't pass the agility test. So the way it worked in Florida was that an individual who wanted to be a police officer first became a dispatcher, because that's where the calls come in. Then you became a correction officer, because that's where you took the persons you arrested. Then you went and you tried to be a police officer. And what that did, it was a beautiful choreographed dance where you understood the role of every job and you had mutual respect for what they did. And so in my mind, I was on this trajectory to be a police officer, but I never passed the agility test. So after I left dispatcher and became a correction officer, then I'm there.
So then how did you end up working in California?
So I went to Morgan State in Baltimore, moved to New York, Harlem exactly, and lived there. And I saw the Gong Show on television, and Cheryl Lynn had got a record deal from Luther Vandross, and I sing. So my brother was in transit quarters out at Travis, and I called him and told him that I wanted to go on the Gong Show, and I'm driving to California. And that's how I got to California, actually. I was this gypsy that would have job, will travel, and I was adventurous and young and obviously very foolish because I'm from Flatland and did not do my great investigation as to what this journey might look like. And I drove out here by myself. And once I came over those mountains and through those woods, I was through. I settled my little behind right where I was, and my brother pointed me to a prison, pointed me to a church, and he went on his journey and went on to England, and I ended up staying in California in the Vacaville area. That's how I got to California.
Love that story. Love that story. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
so you've done a lot of years working inside the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also done a lot since you've retired too. So, but before I get there, I just wanted to, if we could touch just a little bit, you actually went and worked at San Quentin, am I right?
Yeah, I actually started, my first correction officer job was actually in the county in the Fairfield area, and I started there about 1978. I started with the Department of Corrections, but I was a clerical, what's called an assistant clerk. That's an entry-level clerical position. So I worked that job in 1978, my first state job. But I also was a correctional officer in the county jail overnight, so I did two jobs. I was hired as a correctional officer in 1982, CDC at that time, California Department of Corrections, and I had many role models at CMF. Marie Tabbs and Joyce Jackson come to mind. They were trailblazers. Women were just starting in corrections in California in the 70s as well. They were the star women at that particular prison. I didn't transfer to San Quentin until 1984 as a correctional officer, and that's when I went to that prison.
Was that a scary experience going to that prison? Because, as you know, San Quentin has quite the reputation.
Well, interesting enough that my most challenging experiences as a woman were at my first prison. There's the women are being acclimated, women are being understood, received, accepted, those sort of things. And that's new. That's very new. It's happening all over the state, but in pockets of the state, there can be more challenges. San Quentin, I found to have many females there. I wasn't a novelty there. Even as a black female, I wasn't a novelty. There were women there before me. San Quentin just happened to be a righteous level 4 prison, a very hardcore prison. But it was a clear, there was a different mentality toward doing this work at San Quentin than at California Medical Facility, because at San Quentin, you're a part of the team because we need you to be a part of the team. Learn your job and do your job. There wasn't the time for the infighting among you're a woman, you're this. There were challenges, yes. There were situations where you felt disrespected, but for the most part, there was a war going on in 1980 at San Quentin. It was a very different mentality during that particular period. So I was a correctional officer there. In 87, I became a correctional sergeant, a supervisor, and had different opportunities to do my job. And then in 1989, I became a correctional counselor 1 at San Quentin.
Now, did you work with both men and women, or?
San Quentin is a male prison. So at this particular point in my career, from CMF to San Quentin, I have only worked in this department with males. Remember, my role at the county jail when I first started at 19 was working as a matron. So I'm like working in a drunk tank, if you will. Women that came through that were arrested overnight for prostitution or being drunk or whatever the issue was, but I'm in a county jail. Now I'm in a prison setting. Very, very different. And I'm only working with males. I had not seen a female incarcerated. Hadn't even thought about that I'll be honest with you. Had not thought about that population. I'm learning my role there. So my desire was now I'm learning that this is a career. This is not just a job. So at San Quentin, I learned that there is opportunities in this department, and I decided that I wanted to be a classification and parole representative, which is a CC3. So I was a CC, and I finally get it. Even as an officer, I understood that I wanted this to be my career, and I started doing things to learn more about it. Took acting roles, one as a case records manager, to learn the workings of records and see how the staff process files and those sort of things. I wanted to learn the science of corrections, particularly of being a counselor. In 1990, 25 correctional staff were chosen to go through a program that was offered at the prison provided by Sonoma State, right? And we became certified substance abuse counselors for offenders. So now they're starting to see this need for trauma-informed, for recovery, for addiction specialists, and they chose staff. So now I'm on my path to understanding trauma. So now I've got a whole nother thought about what I want to do. But once we graduated, of the 25, only 3 of us started doing groups because it was called the, quote, Hug a Thug program. And nobody wanted to work with the incarcerated. I was allowed to do my first group at San Quentin on what was called the West Block Yard during the outcount with 15 individuals under the watchful eye of a correctional officer with a mini 14 in his hand. That's where I did my first group. And because nobody, you had to prove why you were doing what you were doing. I'm a woman staying back after work, doing a group with a bunch of men. And the question is, why would you want to do that? What is the point? There has to be some ill intentions. And so I had to kind of prove why I did what I did, that this was genuine work for me, that I felt I was on to something that I could make a difference. I'll share this one little tidbit as well at San Quentin, which was a level 4 prison. I stress that because you'll hear now of Pelican Bay. At that time, there was no Pelican Bay. We were the Pelican Bay. San Quentin was. We had the management control unit, we had the security housing unit, all of it in this one prison. And so working in the unit that I worked in, which was a gang unit, I got to see the progression. I got to see them come from general population to management control to security housing, and then go back out to the GP, taking those steps back. But I also had the opportunity to watch Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead bring in the Grateful Dead recording studio into this righteous level 4 prison. I remember I drove cross country to record, and now singing on an album inside San Quentin. And so what that taught me, I learned a lot of things at San Quentin. Number one, that primarily what our job was, to keep people incarcerated, to make sure you had clear boundaries, to do the right things. But I also learned that we could program, that we could provide services to help them understand their problems, that we could also be of service to the community by doing things like recording this album. This album was comprised of inmates and staff. Very unique in that time. So I didn't have as many blatant challenges at San Quentin in the Bay Area as I did in the beginning area.
So, I have to ask, with
Mhm.
the Grateful Dead album, is that available out there
Yeah,
somewhere?
so let me be clear. It is not Grateful Dead's music. No one other than Mickey Hart, he played on the album, but it's called He's All I Need, and it's online. You can still order it
Beautiful. I'll have to check that
on
out.
the internet. Yeah, so it's still there, and I got to record a duet with an incarcerated individual on this album. It was very unique at that time. We had a real progressive warden at that time, and things that would make for salvaging, for being more human, treating people with dignity and respect, progressive type things. We did a lot of those things at that prison. And because I was adventurous and I preached my first sermon at San Quentin. After recording with the album, I directed the choir. We took this choir outside. There were people that paroled, and we did a project. It was a community show called How Did They Do That? And they did it about how San Quentin recorded this album inside the belly of the beast with Mickey Hart. This was a lot of work of a chaplain who had great partnerships, and he brought in this guy to do this album that went across the world. And those sort of unique things are what made me real broad in my thinking relative to how we can reach incarcerated individuals and change their lives.
And music, what a beautiful way of doing it.
It's
That's one thing
powerful.
that unites all people, that
Yes.
especially, Mickey Hart. I mean, I don't know if he brought his drums or anything, but
He did.
that
He was the
heartbeat.
drummer. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
he was one of the producers.
I mean,
We
a
even
lot of
went out
people
to
love
Fantasy
Jerry Got.
Records. Jerry Garcia. We went out
Wow.
to Fantasy Records to finish up some tracks. We took incarcerated individuals out. And I remember one of the managers saying, okay, and the guy's showing his Bible, we're going out to do this. And he said, yeah, you better bring that Bible or you better come back. So, yeah, there's really challenges to doing this work, but there are really opportunities to make profound changes in people's lives when you do it the right way. I believe that.
So now you retired in
Yeah.
2012, but you didn't retire. You have not been sitting around doing nothing, twiddling your thumbs, or knitting. You've
No.
been doing some powerful work since you finished your
Yeah.
job.
I just want to build to that if I can. Valerie,
Yeah.
because I say I want to build to that if I can, because it's important to see how all this is threaded together. So in 1994, I went to dual vocational institution as a CC1. But in 1995 is when I get introduced to female offenders. I go to Central California Women's Facility for the first time. And when I'm there, I learned, number one, the population was so high with women. And the only programs that were offered were NA and AA at that time. So now here I am in 1990. I've developed a program at San Quentin, right? And now here it is 95, and I'm at a prison that doesn't have these type of programs. My program was called Second to None, and I created a curriculum called Prescription for Change. So I'm there, and I see the need. I promote to from CC2 to CC3, and then I go to headquarters as a facility captain. In 2005, the department reorganized and added the R, CDCR. We added rehabilitation as one of our values. And that then opened a window for me to take all those thoughts I had about programs and change and all those things I learned at San Quentin. I had a chance to bring it forward. 2006, I promoted to associate warden. In 2008, I went to the Field Valley State Prison for women, the largest prison at that time for women, and became a chief deputy warden. When I retired in 2012, I originally came back as a retired annuitant and did a sex offender program. And 2013, my son passed away, and so then they offered me this opportunity at CCWF, developing programs, bringing up, if you will, lifting programs at CCWF. First program was Beyond Violence. Second program was Healing Trauma in 2016. And then while I'm there is when I start my journey of identifying needs for programs. So now we're where you were.
Okay. First of all, let me say I'm sorry to hear about your son.
Mm-hmm.
That's always life-changing when something like that happens.
Yeah, that's a whole nother broadcast we could do. He's a military guy. I'd love to tell that story one day.
Well, maybe we'll do that. We'll revisit that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on the prison situation, you were working with the women when you finished, and I found out about your work through a video. Well, I actually found out about your work through Mark Vahanian with Pathway to Kinship. He had talked to me about you, and that's how we met. But I got to see this beautiful video just the other day of you working with women that are aging in prison. And it just touched my heart. It really did. And I would love for you to talk some about that.
Okay. So I stumbled upon Pathways, the trailer and modular in which I do my work primarily is a loaned facility for me. Space is always an issue at prisons. P.S. We could use a modular, but Mark then used it after I left. But he comes a long way. He comes from L.A. to Central California Women's Facility, and I would see him doing this work, and I had great respect for what it presented, the information he shared, and I wanted to learn about it, quite frankly. And so I kind of stumbled on there, just staying late one day, and that's how I began working with Mark and just partnering with him. My day job really is doing groups with incarcerated individuals, so I've created, and my umbrella is Beyond Violence. It is why I'm there. But my role in those works are to train peers to teach their peers. So I train facilitators, incarcerated individuals, to teach the inmate population. And as they're doing their work, I'm able to think about things and needs based on what's being said. And so I created a program called Felons Against Distracted and Drunk Driving, and actually had an opportunity to start that in 2018 at CCWF when I tried to take it to the community, because I want to work with every 15 minutes with youthful individuals before they come into the system. I want to be proactive in the community. They told me that's great, but I have more men than women. So then I had a chance to go and was given an opportunity to create it at San Quentin in 2019. So we have that program running. We have Prescription for Change running. And as I'm talking, I realize there's an empty piece that I call a program called The Middle. In the middle are individuals who've been incarcerated 30, 40, years who've now aged in prison, and then I'm meeting with them, and they're under the assumption that they were never going to get out, so they never did programs. So that's a whole different program. But now I see this population as they come on walkers, in wheelchairs, and I sit at a window and I watch them pass by. And I wonder, have they all ever come together as a group? Because they live on different yards. Most of them live on one facility, but many of them live on the other two facilities. So I created what I call Grandma's Hands. And Grandma Hands is a beckoning, a calling of all the elderly inside the prison to come together as a group and really to assess what they think they need. At this end stage, I'm 69, and my needs have changed from that 19-year-old girl that started doing this work. My needs have changed. And so as I look at myself and the changes that are happening with me, I realize I had a mother that had Alzheimer's, and I watched that progression from dementia to Alzheimer and her passing away. I realized that some of the women that are getting write-ups for agitated behavior, it's not because they're violent, it's because they're ill. And I want to make sure we're having those conversations about this change that's happening that they may not understand, and we as correctional staff may not be trained in. I'm not saying they're not, but Velda wanted to understand it. So let me say it that way. So I had a chance. I was given the opportunity by the warden to have, everything's a protracted story, but San Quentin hygiene items that were donated to them, they had an overage. We found out about it. Jesse from Pollen Initiative agreed to bring it to the prison, and I was allowed to provide it to the population. I chose Grandma's Hands, elderly women, twofold, two-pronged that I want to do with them. One of the things I want to do with them is I want to take I've asked permission to take a small pilot group and have the older women who crochet and sew teach these young, violent individuals coming in who've not sat at the knees of any grandma and learn how this can calm their spirit and make them focus and work against distractions. And so that's one part of Grandma's Hand. The other is I'm working now on a program in March in which I will invite them back again. I agreed to do this quarterly and have them come together collectively as a group. And this time, I have mental health working with me. I have the coach working with me to teach them stretching. Yep, right in your wheelchair, you can stretch and move your body, because if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, mobility and such. So they're going to do that. Mental health will help me talk to them about these changes that are happening in our mind, that if we're not mindful of it, will come across as bizarre behavior, as disruptive behaviors, violent behavior. Really, it's just deterioration. And I will have hospice individuals talk to them about what would we like to happen in the future. So that's where I'm at right now, working on that particular project.
That's, I never gave it a second thought of the women aging in prison. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I work mostly with men myself.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start thinking about especially behavior changes, and, I would think that the younger staff had probably not dealt with that yet. They maybe haven't had their grandparents go through that, or parents. So to have that understanding of the women, I mean, to think that you could be disciplined for being sick and it was no one's fault because nobody thought about the idea that it could be dementia.
Yeah.
And I would also think things like, there's incontinence that happens, to make sure that they have, proper hygiene materials and those types of things, things that you don't think about until you get there.
So, and Valerie, let me be fair and say, this is me in a vacuum thinking these thoughts. I am not saying CDCR doesn't have some vast initiative working for the population. I know that California Medical Facility has a memory care unit. They may not be the only one that does. I just know that I summons 176 elderly women, 65 and older. And believe it or not, I really should have reached to 55 and older, because chronological age is different when you've lived a rough life, when you've used drugs, when you've been on the street, when you've been homeless, when you've spent most of your life in prison. You age very differently than a person who just sat knitting and crocheting, going to church. Yeah, it's a difference. So they're older, while they may be 55, they're 65 in body, in mind. And so, I'm looking at whether I might reach to younger individuals to invite them as well. But what I want to see happening, I don't understand it to be happening. So I'm not saying it's not. It's important that I put that out there, that the department may have an aged initiative that I'm not a part of. I'm not privy to. But I'm a boots on the ground kind of girl. I'm in the trenches kind of girl. That's why I continue to do this work 13 years after retirement, because I want to hear it and see it for myself. And I get the feedback I get that if those things are happening, my 176 women don't know about it.
Well, the thing is, too, is when you do the work, even though we do totally different work, but I've worked also in prisons and had that direct, experience. You only know what happens in those facilities that you're in. And you really get so caught up in your own work and your own job, it's really hard to even think about what's happening in the other hundreds of facilities that are out there. And California, holy cow, California is doing some amazing things out there. I mean, I work with, different facilities across the country, and the idea that the young juveniles that have gone in are getting a chance to go home when they have life without parole. And, there's a lot of, a matter of fact, do you work with former lifers also on the outside?
I do. I work with 97 individuals, previously incarcerated individuals, male and female, who have paroled. So I do two programs in the community. I do a program called Bridging the Divide, which I'm trying to be the bridge to capture these wonderful things that are done in the Department of Corrections that when the individual paroles don't seem to have been enough. So my job is to try to catch those issues and kind of bubble them up and make people aware, maybe we should do this a little different. Maybe we should do this a little better. And so that's that program. And then I teach domestic violence to another group of individuals in the community. But I am a liaison for many, like I said, male and female, who have paroled in the community.
Well, now we're going to go to a completely different thing. I have two other things I want to cover, but I want to ask you, has there been a book in your life that has really influenced you, or just was a favorite book, like a childhood book?
My favorite book is the Bible. So I'm a preacher too. So let me just say that. So many of the stories in there resonate with me. I spend a lot of time looking at the women, learning. Most of the healing things I think of come from the struggles that have happened. I'm a fan of Bradshaw. I'm a fan of Maxwell. I've done a lot of study on his leadership stuff. But there's a book that was written by a gentleman and his daughter called No More Bumps. I don't know if you read that book. It's a kid's book, No More Bumps. And that book, for whatever reason, I actually introduced it to my team as in a training method. I'll try to find out the name of it for you. But the author, but him and his daughter wrote this book. He's a doctor. It just really made me understand a lot of things about life. I didn't have much of a childhood. I grew up, got pregnant very early, and I was on my own very early. And that then hindered a lot of childhood-like things. But this book was significant to me. I would love that you would take time to find it and read it.
I did write it down because I wanted to make sure that I looked it up.
Yeah, I can't. Oh, yeah, here it is. It is by Dr. Wayne Dyer, Dyer, and his daughter, Saje Dyer, Dyer. So it's called Goodbye Bumps.
Goodbye Bumps.
It
All
tells
right.
you to talk to what's bugging you. And so I believe that there's a lot of power in what I teach my incarcerated individuals that while we've had a lot of people feed into our mind, and we've been robbed of self-esteem and self-worth and all those things, is what we say to ourselves that matter. We believe us more than we believe anybody else. And so I try to teach them to self-talk positive, to self-talk motivational things. And so this book was a great teaching tool for me. So
I
that's
always
actually one of my favorite books.
I always love to ask that question, and I don't usually tell people I'm going to ask it, so I apologize for taking you off guard. But I learn from others by asking that because I am a reader. I have books all around me, stacks of them, and
Yeah,
so I always like to know other books that have been life-changing to people because they may really be to somebody else also.
yeah,
So there was one more thing I wanted to touch on because with all that you do, you also have a ministry.
I do.
So, and you have services every Sunday,
Every Sunday at 11 a.m. and Bible study on Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. I do.
and then you have groups also through the church, like Bible study and
I have Bible study. I teach at a men's unhoused facility. I teach a Bible study to them, and they come to church with us. And so we do have a food distribution ministry, and these same grandma hands that we have in the prison, I have at my church. I have that 15-year-old girl, wayward girl that I was there. I have that single mother with her 4 children that I was there. I have this victim of domestic violence that I was there. And so my ministry is a little unorthodox in the sense that many people come to our ministry who are broken, who are hurting, who are in pain. And I can relate to them not only because of my day job, but because of my lived experience that I'm not ashamed to talk about today.
isn't that the people that Jesus wanted us to work with?
I believe so. I believe so.
I read, if I remember, he put his hands out to the lepers.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that's right. That's right. He
right.
touched him. I just preached about that. He actually touched him, and imagine having not been touched for years. Imagine that. I always have a burden for people who live alone, who come to church alone, who sit alone, who pray alone, worship alone, and then get back in their car and go home alone. I try to break that up if I have to wander around myself and touch them. I encourage others to be mindful of that and touch them. So our ministry, is not a gigantic, multi-mega church. Mine is given to me based upon where the Lord has placed me in my life and what I've been through in my own life.
You know, I have also felt that I have been guided to do the work that I've done. I've been doing it for a very long time. I at one time said I was done with it, wasn't doing it anymore, and then I went back and got my master's. And I'm doing a very different job now. I'm taking everything that I've learned and bringing other people in to share with those that need guidance and can use hope and to understand that there are many people out here that care about what's going on in our correctional facilities. And we want you to get better and we want you to come home and we want you to heal and we want you healthy. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
My goal, I'll be honest with you, I have zero desire to retire. I want to leave it all on the field. I'm not a person that dreams of going on a beach and being on a cruise. This is a ministry for me. 13 years I've been allowed to go back. You serve at the pleasure of, and so I've been allowed to create. I've been allowed to reach out. I've been allowed to offer tools for change. I'm honored with that. And it's my life's work. I did my job. When I was in the chair, I did my job up to and including acting warden. I had an opportunity to serve from clerical all the way to the top pinnacle of a prison, and now I'm doing my life's work. This is my ministry. This is my to give back, to offer tools for change, to help people change their life, to be a part of that transition, to be both in the prison and in the community. And as long as I'm allowed to serve, I'll do that. And when I'm not, then I'll find some other way to do exactly what my life's work is.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I want people out there that are listening to know, especially you young women out there, that you can do anything you set your mind to. And Velda Dobson-Davis is a very good example of that.
Thank you very
Is
much.
there
I appreciate
anything that we didn't cover or anything else that you would like to say before we close out?
I would just like to say that I don't believe that there's any job that a woman cannot do. I believe that if we open our minds, that we can find a way to be a part of it. Our approaches are different. We can be gentler and kinder in a lot of respects. What we bring to the table, I believe, is needed. And so there's always a seat at the table. If not, there's always a corner in the room. That's what I feel. All I need is to be in the room. I just desire to be a part of what is happening in this world and be a part of the change that needs to occur. I don't want to be just talk about problems. I want to be a part of the solution. So I don't desire to just make money. I want to make a difference in the lives of people, all people.
I knew there was a reason I liked you. We
Thank you.
think so much alike. We really
Thank you.
do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for blessing us
Thank you
with
for
your beautiful
having me.
spirit today.
Thank you. I hope
And
I did well.
you did great. So I'm just going to give a closeout, and if you'll hold on and stay on for a minute. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to remind our listeners we've had Velda Dobson-Davis with us in the studio. I'm very thankful that she has joined us. She's doing beautiful work out there, and other women that are out there. Please remember that I always like having female guests. We have lots of men that come on the show, but not as many women. So I will be back with episode 6 in just a couple of weeks. And thank you for joining us on the Prison Pod. Okay. You did a wonderful job. Thank
I
you
did
so